Well, I want to welcome Patsy to the show. Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for letting me speak today.
Yeah. So Patsy is a mom to a child with selective mutism, and she's an AT parent as well. And she's coming on today because I really feel like we have to have a more in-depth conversation about selective mutism. And she is a perfect person to talk to because she's a mom of a child with selective mutism, and she's also just this huge advocate. But I'll stop talking. Patsy, I'll let you introduce yourself and maybe give people a little idea of like your background and your story.
Sure. Thanks, Natasha. So I have 3 kids. They're 8, 5, and 3. They're all super busy. My 2 boys are both anxious. Our 5-year-old, when he was about 2, we noticed that something was a little bit off. And so we spent about 2.5 years really advocating for him, trying to search for answers. What's wrong? How do we help him? Nobody knew how to do that. So after a couple of years, we found the right help. And I started to realize, like, there's nobody out there to speak for my son. And if he doesn't have a voice, I need to be his voice. And I realized it was much bigger than just us. It's this whole community of parents and kids. And it's just a disservice to them to not speak up. So I've become an advocate for parents and kids with SM. And I am also one of the Selective Mutism Association state coordinators for Minnesota.
Which is so impressive. Yeah, I just think it's so impressive because I feel like I kind of met you on virtually, like at the beginning of your journey, and just to see like how far you've come to the point where, and I love the way that you just said to be a voice, because it's almost like a literal thing to be a voice for kids with SM. So, and I think turning our own struggles into advocacy or making a difference in other people's lives is such the rainbow, for all this. So I want to back up and break SM down because selective mutism is definitely not talked about enough. And I think people don't understand it. So can you help people like define that? What is selective mutism? We'll start with the basics.
Sure. So a pretty basic definition in layman's terms is selective mutism is an anxiety disorder where a kid can speak, pretty comfortably at home and it's normal, but you get them outside of the home, somewhere where they're uncomfortable and they're rendered mute. It's often fight, flight, or freeze. And for our son, it was freeze. It would just be an absolute blank stare. It looked like he was ignoring people. I think we had 4 hearing tests in a span of 6 months because people were concerned that he was having hearing issues. So it's select situations, people where they're just absolutely rendered mute.
Yeah, and I think it gets misdiagnosed so much because, one, I don't think enough actual mental health professionals understand selective mutism. And 2, I think parents often chalk it up to being shy, or it's misdiagnosed as maybe being on the spectrum or having learning disabilities. I remember when I think I was in undergrad and my sister's son was not talking. And my sister was saying to me, they're testing him for like developmental delays and stuff. And I said, why? And she said, and he was probably about 5 or 6 at the time, he just doesn't talk. And I said, well, I hear him talking. I hear him talking all the time. And she was like, oh no, he's like completely silent at school. And so I was like an undergrad psych student. And so I looked it up and I'm like, there's something called selective mutism. And no one, like not the school, not my sister, like nobody had ever mentioned that word or knew what it was. And it just goes to show, how it happens and how it manifests and people just are clueless.
Right.
So if somebody has a child who is shy, how can they differentiate between shy and having selective mutism?
I love that you asked that question because we have our 2 boys. Our son with selective mutism is actually very extroverted. He is not shy. He's loud. He loves playing with kids. It just recharges him to be around his peers. And then we have our 3-year-old who is shy. He's introverted. He likes to play by himself. He's slow to warm up, but he eventually does warm up. So what differentiates the 2 between the child who is slow to warm up and selective mutism is that kids with selective mutism don't really warm up. So our son went, 2.5 years without speaking to anyone outside the home. And even at times he had a difficult time with us. So no speech at all. versus, maybe a little bit slow to warm up.
Yeah.
And the other thing that's common with selective mutism is social anxiety disorder. Lots of, feelings and thoughts about what are other people thinking about me? Are they going to hear my voice? Our son would say when he was 3, people are going to laugh at me. So even at that age, having this fear of that, where our current 3-year-old is like, I just don't want to talk to people. Like, I don't have anything to say to my friend.
That's a good way to differentiate, because I think, the shy child is like, who are you? I'm a little nervous around you. And they might evolve to have social anxiety or not. They might just be slow to warm. Like, I don't know what the situation is.
Right.
And selective mutism, like there is, with the kids that I've worked with, and I never saw my nephew actually be silent because I was not one of his silent
circle.
Yeah, I was in his inner circle. But the kids I've worked with who have come into my practice, they are literally silent. So I think if you have a child who, like you said, one is not slow to warm, they never warm, but they're also like literally silent to the point where like they don't even really, a lot of them don't want to make any sounds at all, and they'll stifle it.
Yep.
And you bring up another good point.
Smile. He wouldn't like blow bubbles. We tried to do like cotton ball races. He wouldn't even breathe where he knew someone could hear him.
Yeah. And that's a good way to differentiate, is just that complete silence. Or if a lot of people say, oh, I've never heard him talk, and it doesn't get better, it's like it progresses.
Right.
So, if they're silent in an environment, unless they get some treatment and help, they continue to be silent, for the whole school year. So that's another way to look at it.
And that's another good misconception that you bring up, is like this idea that kids are going to outgrow selective mutism. Something we've learned is kids actually grow into it, much like other anxiety disorders. They can sometimes figure out ways to avoid it or get around it, but generally they grow into it, which means it only habituates and gets worse.
Yeah, and the longer you get those habits, hardwired in your brain, the harder it is to get them out of that. And do you find that there's like a comorbid condition a lot of times with speech issues? I find that maybe like 2/3 of the kids I've worked with had some speech issues on top of it.
So that's a great question. I know that the Smart Center, which I did provide you the link to them, they have actual studies on that. And I do believe there's a high percentage of kids. Our son had an articulation delay, but because nobody else heard him, I brought it up at his preschool screening, nobody else heard him, they couldn't assess for that. So we did end up going to a childhood language disorders clinic, and he was like in the 4th percentile. But it's kind of a catch-22. We couldn't do speech therapy because he wouldn't speak, and we couldn't do like the psychological therapy because he wasn't participating in it. So it was really tough to find a starting point.
Yeah. So it's a vicious cycle, because you really can't get the help because he's not going to talk to get the help or work on that. So you have to work on the anxiety first.
Right.
Yeah, I have seen a lot of kids. Now there are kids that are coming to mind that I've worked with who didn't have any kind of speech issue and still had selective mutism, but a big chunk of them did, where I was like, there's a pattern here. Why do all these kids, have some sort of speech issue? And it kind of goes back to the social anxiety. I don't want people to hear, a speech impediment or a stutter or an articulation issue or a processing issue, because I don't want them to make fun of me. And so it kind of comes back again to social anxiety, is fueling a lot of selective mutism, I think.
Yeah.
So why do you think people wait? Because you don't really see a lot of people getting treatment for their kids with selective mutism until they hit school.
Right. So I think my personal opinion is because so many people are telling parents they're just shy. They're adapting to some sort of change because life is always changing. Friends and family are saying they're probably being defiant. They're manipulating you. Maybe you need better structure at home. Maybe this is sort of a parenting issue. It's a control issue. I think people aren't addressing the root of the problem. So as the mutism is actually, I guess in my opinion, I don't know what the research says on this, as a symptom of the anxiety.
Yeah.
That's just the outward symptom, and the deep root causes the anxiety. And I think the biggest reason why people wait is that is not getting addressed. on pediatric levels, on school screenings. I mean, obviously, most of these kids are totally normal at home, so parents don't see it until the age where they go to preschool or school, and it just sort of gets bypassed as all of these other reasons of something else.
Yeah, and that is such a good point because one, I think a lot of times people misread it as defiance. I've seen it be misinterpreted as defiance. I remember at one time I had a family I was working with, and the mom would just be like, she's so rude. You know, she won't say thank you. She won't say hello. She's just completely silent and just stares at people, and it's embarrassing and it's rude. And after I started working with her, because this child did talk to me, so selective mutism wasn't on my radar initially, I realized that she had SM. And I said, she's not being rude, she's overwhelmed. And so as a parent, and maybe a parent who has their own social anxiety or anxiety in general, it can be overwhelming. And I think you can misinterpret it as opposition or as just an embarrassment because it's a reflection on you. Like, my child's not speaking, and people are perceiving this as being rude.
Right. And sort of on that topic, when you said the mom said she wouldn't say hi or bye, there are 5 words that are incredibly hard. Most of the centers that work with kids with SM say don't work on this until the end. Hello, goodbye, please, thank you, and I'm sorry.
Isn't that fascinating?
Yeah, and we found that with our son. He still has a very difficult time with hello. So we just say, go ahead and give him a wave, and he'll wave now. But he still cannot say hello to like teachers, grandparents. Sometimes he'll do this silly avoidance thing, and we sort of let that go and try to prompt like, hello, Jello, or something that's fun for him to be able to transition into that. But very difficult time, and they say just push those to the last because you can sort of shape those as the anxiety lessons.
That's good for people to hear because I feel like those are the main words that we want people to say.
And I feel like that's where we started. When we didn't know, that's where we started. And we were like, just say hi. It's just one word. Just do it. Just say hi. I'll give you like $10 million. And it was just hard. I know. It's like we were ridiculous, but we didn't know.
Yeah. And I mean, honestly, I think most parents don't know. And there's definitely not enough talk about this. And I think schools don't know. A lot of therapists don't know. And so people don't know what to do with this. And so they say, let's just start with the basics. Let's just start with the hi or the thank you. Just at least say thank you. So the other type of parent, you know, I think you get different parenting styles who are just desperate and trying to cope. So you get the ones that are angry and defiant and, you know, like they're labeling their child as defiant and they're frustrated. They see it as a behavioral issue. And I'm just talking about the extremes here, obviously. Mm-hmm. And then if you swing all the way over to the other side, you have the parent that enables inadvertently and they become the voice literally for their child. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So when we first took our son to the speech and language clinic, they said we had already suspected SM by this point. They were like, yeah, like it's the inability to speak and it's not due to any other thing, but he does have this articulation delay. But that's not why he's not speaking. So at that point, they had given us a handout that was like, don't speak for your son. And we had, his sister was 2 years older. We're like, yeah, she does that all the time. But then we realized like we would go in stores and somebody would say hi. And we would label him, oh, no, that's okay. He doesn't say hi to people. He's shy.
Yes.
So when that started happening, we were like, oh, that's us. We're enabling him instead of encouraging him to be brave. You don't have to say hi, but go ahead and give him a wave, you know, something nonverbal. Give him a thumbs up for a hello sort of thing. We were saying, nope, that's okay. He's shy, labeling that for him to say, you know, I'm the shy kid. I don't have to talk. And so we realized, ooh, we're doing that.
You know, and I think probably most parents do that because that's just an intuitive thing to do, you know, to say, you know, one, it can be embarrassing. I know, with my social anxiety, a lot of times with my youngest daughter, when she would do things that she was just very like a ham and it would just mortify me and she had no filter, you know, and so she obviously did not have selective mutism, but she would just be like, you know, why is he so big? Why is he so bald? You know, and I'd just be like mortified. So, I mean, as anxious parents, we can be overwhelmed with our child's behavior. And so we'll quickly swoop in, or we're empathizing with our child so much that we want to swoop in as well and just say, he's shy, he's not going to talk to you, because we want to rescue them or we want to rescue ourselves from the awkwardness. But then the child with selective mutism is hearing that. And then I think they identify with that. And then they hang on to that label as like a warm comfort, a warm barrier that they can proudly wear of, I'm shy, so this is okay, just don't talk to me. And nobody's trying to do that, but I think that that's the message that we send when we do that. So if parents are listening, have kids with selective mutism, and we'll get into treatment and stuff in a second, but since we're already here with this topic, how should parents handle that in the moment if they have a child that's currently not talking outside of the home?
So for us, we had tried to start, if I can pop real quick, tried to start with therapy that didn't work with a therapist, and then we found a specialist who did. And she actually recommended giving up the verbal stuff, starting with totally nonverbal things, handing a credit card to the cashier, receiving a receipt, waving hello or goodbye. And we honestly had to start with waving to people on the sidewalk through our house windows. We couldn't even go outside and wave. So it was a very gradual process of, let's wave to the person there. Let's open the garage door and wave from inside the garage. Let's take 3 steps and wave. Let's take 4 steps and wave. So it was very gradual for us, waving in the car, doing those types of things first. When we got to the point where we were almost ready to talk and people would say something and they would say, it's okay, he's shy, I would say, no, he's not shy, he's working on being brave. So go ahead and give them a thumbs up for a hello.
Oh, I love that.
That's what we would do.
I love that.
Yeah, it was very empowering for him and us to be able to have a little bit of control over those words and building his confidence. Like, yeah, he's working on being brave and he can do, a nonverbal, a wave, a head nod, a thumbs up. We actually started with hand waves behind his back because it was too hard for him. Somebody's going to see me waving. So we did a lot of upfront work with nonverbals, which to us was like, mind-blowing. Of course this makes sense. Talking has always been too hard.
Yeah, and taking it one step at a time, because sometimes we see a problem and we see the solution and we don't see the in-between. And so, my child's not talking to anybody, that's not typical. That's not normal. I can't have that. And then the way that progress would look is that he will be completely, social and he'll talk to everybody. And there's no in-between. And so I have found sometimes with the parents that I've worked with, and I totally get it, having my own kids with anxiety, the frustration if, as a therapist, I'm excited that they're waving non-verbally and they're like, okay, so what? How about him talking? And this progress is a journey. And so I love the way you talked about that you'd wave inside your house or he'd wave behind his back. And every little step is a step to build his confidence, a step to empower him, and a step in the right direction. And that goes for any child with any kind of anxiety or OCD. Progress is measured in centimeters. It's so tiny, but you have to kind of empower them slowly.
Right. I feel like we're snails running marathons, but that is okay because there's a finish line and that's where we are. We're headed toward the finish line. So
yeah, and that's actually how you build lifelong skills, because if they are forced to talk, or if they are, put a spotlight is put on them, or if the therapy approach is aggressive, there's like a trauma related to that where it's not their pace, it's not what they wanted, it's what everybody else around them wanted. And so I feel like it doesn't stick as much with any kind of anxiety or OCD stuff. It's when we empower them to do it themselves, like you were talking about, their self-esteem improves and they feel good about it. Okay, so let's get into diagnosis and treatment. So a lot of people are like, where do I go to even get an assessment or a diagnosis of this?
Right. So we lived in a town of about 90,000 people, and nobody had even ever heard of selective mutism until we started bringing in like copies of, the DSM diagnosis, and slapped it down and said, our son has this. So ultimately we got the diagnosis from a local psychologist. We ended up traveling 3 hours to find a specialist because the treatment was so effective. The first psychologist we saw for about 4.5 months, 2 to 3 times a week, and it was just a very unstructured play therapy. And so she had really been approaching it as, your son went through some sort of traumatic event. Maybe we can pinpoint it, maybe we can't. we did have a baby around the time that he was born. So everyone was saying it was the baby. It was too traumatic for him, sort of thing. And never really honing in on, he's always been an anxious kid ever since the time he was 6 weeks old. So
I'm glad you brought that up, not to interject, but I'll totally forget this and you're going to go on. Because I mentally meant to bring that out, that a lot of times school and therapists will think there's a trauma.
Yes.
And that's kind of a dangerous assumption, because I know I had worked with a boy who had selective mutism, and the school convinced the mom that somehow he must have been sexually abused or had some severe trauma to make him not talk, because he was actually quite old. He was probably about 9, but he had pockets of selective mutism his whole life. And everybody was spending their time and energy looking for this abuse that did not exist. So that's just a good thing to highlight. I mean, your trauma, the therapist thought a baby. People will try to look, and a lot of like maybe traditional therapists will try to look for the origin, and they're missing the boat on that. So I just wanted to interject, because that's
no. And at first we were like, oh yeah, that makes sense. But then we looked back and we were like, well, from the time he could walk, he was terrified of walking on glossy floors. Like in grocery stores, he wouldn't do that. He would run away from us and hide, and he wouldn't be able to call out. And I just assumed he was playing hide and seek, and he was really, really good at hide and seek. We actually had to shut down Target.
Oh no.
So we could find him. But yeah, we had just assumed, like everybody else, that it was either a defiant phase or some sort of trauma that he just stopped talking. And then we realized, well, no, he had acquired his language around the same time. He never talked to anyone outside of our house.
Yeah. Yeah. So you don't have to find a smoking gun. I think that, and I keep saying this, but that goes for a lot of anxiety. I think a lot of times we're looking for the smoking gun, and you can waste a lot of money in therapy with the wrong therapist. Yep. Because you can have a therapist who's looking for a smoking gun and they're not going to find one, or like unstructured play therapy for anxiety or selective mutism or OCD. Got to throw that in there.
Yep.
You might as well just take your money and burn it in your kitchen sink.
Yeah. And that's what it felt like for us. We were paying thousands of dollars for this. Our copays were quite expensive. Thousands of dollars. And our son loved it. He got to go play these games where she said, you never have to talk to me if you never want to, kind of thing. So he was like, can I go play with the doctor now? Why, yes, you can. And there goes $60. So,
now, play therapy is great, I think, for trauma and for like divorce and grief. So there is, there are some really good issues that play therapy can work with, but selective mutism and anxiety and OCD really need a more structured approach.
Right. Yeah. So the specialist that we saw works with 2 theories. She works with the SCAT approach from the Smart Center, and then she used like the Kurt's Brave Buddy models. He modified PCIT therapy directly for verbalization for selective mutism. And it uses a lot of positive reinforcement, extrinsic rewards, not awards. And I know there's a big debate about that, but we found with the reward system, as soon as our son got verbal, that in itself was a reward, and we could pull those external motivators, and he didn't even notice. I mean, he was 5 at the time, so that's probably a lot harder to do with, say, a 15-year-old. But for us, that was just so worth it to take those 2 approaches that were very structured. They have benchmarks. They had like graduated approaches. We're going to start with, eye contact and waving. We're going to work all the way up to free communication with any person in any situation, which we're still working on. But having the right type of structured therapy, just from the experts, really helped us to get all the tools that we needed as parents to help our son.
Yeah, and I think rewards are key. I do, and I know there is a debate about that. I actually talked to Ross Green, who is really, the king of don't give your kids rewards for things, and even he agreed when I was talking to him that as long as the child's, building those skills and they're motivated, I can't be as eloquent as he described it, but that's okay. Because I was saying in my treatment, I am constantly giving rewards out for kids doing exposures or doing things that are challenging. And, eventually we move away from those rewards.
Right.
We space them out. We make them harder to earn. And like you said, ultimately, the biggest reward is not having the anxiety, not having selective mutism, not having OCD symptoms. Like that's the ultimate reward. So it's using those rewards as a carrot. You're asking a kid, in my opinion, to jump off a cliff and that there may or may not be a parachute that's going to pop out. That's how they feel. And you're not going to want to jump off a cliff, but if somebody said, I promise you there's a parachute and there's also $100,000 on the bottom, all right, I'll try. But then,
and that's kind of the way we look at it. This is really hard work for them. So there has to be some sort of, we go to work, we get a paycheck. So this is sort of their work and their paycheck. And I mean, our son gets to pick and he's on board when he, gets 10 minutes of Mario or whatever it is, a lollipop for speaking to 5 people in the store. When he gets to pick the reward and be a part of the process, he's more motivated to get it done. And he does a really good job.
Yeah. And then he sees, what, that wasn't as hard as I thought.
Right.
And you also are like, you're kind of rewarding, this is going to sound redundant, but like you're rewarding the reward center, so you're like,
right.
You're making a causal link between I speak and something really fun and exciting is happening and my neurons are snapping away saying, oh, lollipop. And it's attached to speaking. And so I'm making this causal relationship of a feel-good moment instead of an anxiety moment,
right.
which eventually is in and of itself, you can just pull back and those feel-good feelings are there.
Right.
And ultimately, I see kids just so happy to get rid of their anxiety. That's the ultimate reward. But kids are in the here and now. They only see today. They don't see like, you don't want to be 20 and not being able to talk. They're not going to get that. So even adult therapists often will use kind of fun rewards to gamify it and make it cool.
Right.
So I doubt that a lot of people are going to be able to find a therapist who does all those approaches. Where can people start?
So I would look on the SMA website, which is selectivemutism.org. You can start there. There's a link to providers and a link to SMA state coordinators. Sometimes there are providers who don't register with the SMA, but sometimes the coordinators just know, hey, this therapist works with SM kids, or this person is familiar with anxiety, CBT, and exposure therapy in little kids or teenagers or whatever it is. So reach out to one of us. We will email you back as soon as we can and try to figure out who to connect you to.
Yeah. And therapy, I don't know what your experience is, but I feel like therapy can be very slow going at first. And I know that as a therapist, sometimes there's so much pressure. The few kids that I've treated with selective mutism, because it's pretty rare. I don't see it often in my practice. But the ones that I have seen, I felt so much pressure from the parent that I almost, whenever I get a child with selective mutism, I'm almost traumatized where I'm like, I don't know if I can help you.
I know, it's hard.
Because I think a lot of times parents aren't educated on selective mutism. They are so upset and nervous about what's going on. And then when I get excited and say, he blew bubbles today, or, you know what, he was able to vocalize the sound, or, he made sound effects in my story, they look at me like I'm ridiculous, and did he talk to you though? Did he talk to you? How long do you think this is going to take? How many sessions is this going to take? What's the prognosis? And I start to feel panicky myself. And so I think it's good for parents to realize that, your therapist is making progress slowly by getting them to do these small steps that will lead to big results. But when you put your own anxiety on it, or you pressure your child, or even if you pressure the therapist, it's going to slow down the progress. I just want to put that out there.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I feel like we were maybe that way. We gave the therapist 12 weeks, but then we were like, oh, our son stopped talking at home. So that's when we sought out a specialist. My best advice to parents is skip all of that. Don't go to a local therapist who has never worked with a kid who has a SM. You can also contact some of the bigger centers, Thriving Minds in Michigan, CMI in New York City. We work with them. They're absolutely fabulous. And the Smart Center, I believe there might be centers in Oklahoma City, somewhere in California, maybe Washington. You have to do some research on that. But some of those big centers that help kids specifically with SM actually will do Skype calls back and forth. And I think,
Oh, that's cool.
yeah, it's so nice. Of course, most insurances don't pay for it, which kind of stinks, but it's definitely well worth it to come out with the skills to help your child, because not only are you learning about the SM skills, this is going to help with the anxiety over the span of your child's lifetime, or however long it takes for your child to get the skills to adapt and cope.
Yeah, I agree. I think if you have the financial means to do it, definitely going to one of those big centers. Child Mind Institute is CMI.
Yep.
The SMART, I don't
The
know
SMART
that.
Center, Selective Mutism Anxiety Research Treatment Center.
Where is that located?
That is in Pennsylvania.
Okay.
And I believe Kurt's Psychology is in New York. He used to head up CMI, but he broke off.
Okay. You're like the expert in SM.
I researched a ton, and part of my goal as an advocate and an SMA coordinator is to be able to push this information out to where people can find it, because I feel like I searched and searched and searched thousands of hours just trying to find information, watch videos, listen to podcasts, and it was really hard to find information.
Yeah. I just don't think there's a lot of information out there, which is kind of crazy. And so you have sent me all the links, and so I will leave links all below so that parents know how to navigate this. I do agree. I feel like maybe finding, if you can, kind of like, did you went to New York for?
Yeah, so we flew to New York for a 5-day intensive with our son. By that time, we had already seen our therapist here in St. Paul, Minnesota, which was a 3-hour drive for us. So we actually did end up getting our insurance to cover the New York trip, which was very difficult. I'm an advocate for that too, helping parents get this insurance coverage. There's lots of exceptions and whatnot, because it's not covered under traditional plans, and most people don't even have providers in network. Anyway, so we went out there for 5 days. We already had the skills that we needed. We were already starting to do effective exposures. So at Child Minds, not only did they do exposures with our son, like really, really fun stuff, we went to like huge candy stores, and we were asking all the employees, what's your biggest gummy bear? Can you show me? Can you help me reach the black candy on the top shelf type thing? We were doing that, but my husband and I were also getting training on how to lead our own fade-ins to help teach teachers and our therapists at home. And so just this big network of parent knowledge and exposure-based therapy for our son. And we actually got a lot of financial aid from them. They do have a financial aid program. So that was pretty incredible to be able to participate in that and to get those skills as parents. And I feel like part of why we have had so much success this last year is because we've been doing the therapy almost daily. So our therapist taught us to be the therapist, and that's what we do. We go out and we do these exposures. We do the CBT that goes along with it. How hard is it going to be? Is it going to be this hard, this hard, this hard, this hard? If it's too hard, we don't do it. We come back for it because we know we can't do this hard, but we know we can do this hard, this hard, this hard, and this hard. So,
yeah, I like the visual. Nobody will see it on the podcast, but you're doing it with your hands, which I really like. So and I know there are parents who are listening to this there's a lot of parents in the UK, Australia, South Africa, and in small rural towns in America who are probably thinking to themselves, I don't have the funds to do that. Even if they give me a scholarship, I can't do that. I can't afford therapy. So for those parents, what can they do to help their kids? Is there a good book on selective mutism or like a guide?
There is. I believe it's called the Selective Mutism Resource Manual by Dr. Amy Koterba. That one is my favorite for just getting the knowledge, the depth of knowledge of what SM is, how to treat it, what effective exposures look like, how to make exposure ladders very gradual. I feel like that's often a problem that we have. We see, like you said, we see the starting line, we see the finish line. Well, there's no reason why my kid can't just jump from start to finish kind of thing. So she goes through all of that in depth. And there's also a parent field guide as well. And I don't know if I gave you that link, but we should definitely provide that. And that actually has visuals, picture visuals of this is a reward chart. Here's a fun race car track that you can use in school. And this is the game that will connect with it. So lots of ideas. It goes through a case study of a little girl named Anna and the journey that her mom walked through several years ago. in getting help for her child with SM, because like many people in rural areas, she didn't have anyone to help her.
Yeah, that's a great resource, because if people can at least get their hands on that book
Yes.
and learn what would be really helpful from somebody who knows what they're talking about, they can do it themselves. If that's the worst case scenario, it's something much better than nothing. So yeah, I'll get that resource from you, and I'll leave links below as well. So for those that are not, they're listening in their car and they're not going to look at my links, where is the best starting place to go to get all these resources?
So I really like the SMART Center. It's the Selective Mutism Anxiety Research Treatment Center from Pennsylvania. They have just a tab on their page, and it says resources, and they have everything from teachers to the SM guide. What is SM? It's an 18-page little pamphlet type thing, and I like to include those with my son's teachers when we take him to like a VBS type thing, just for these are things that could happen. He's actually doing very well right now. These are things that could happen. And so here are just 5 key points of relieving anxiety, the do's and don'ts, basically, is what we try to include with that. And so, the SMART Center has a very good just resource page there for everything.
That's good.
Yeah, they include like existing or not existing comorbid diagnoses with there. So you're not like, my kid has this and this and this and this. It's pretty typical for kids with SM to have a lot of overlapping spectrum traits. Yeah. So that's in there. They've done a lot of studies side by side with LaSalle University. And so all of that information is just in one condensed place, resources tab. CMI also has a pretty good website. And I also like Anxiety BC. I can't remember if I sent you that. It gives a really good visual of the negative reinforcement cycle of anxiety. So, and that was what gave my husband and I the visual of like, oh yeah, we are totally completing this cycle every time that we say he's shy. That makes him feel better. Yeah. That makes us feel better. So that was another good resource.
Oh yeah. Well, send that to me and I'll add it. I'll just have like a lot of links. So the SMART Center, do you happen to know what their website is? Is it smartcenter.org?
Ooh, I don't know what their website is off the top of my head.
That's okay. I will look it up, and then when I record my goodbyes, I will add that, and it will be like seamless.
Yes. That's definitely my favorite resource though, because I just have the resource tab, boom, it's right there.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing this. This is good information to disseminate and let people know. I'm happy to get this message out because there's nothing out there like that.
All right. Well, thank you for being part of the voice that speaks for kids with SM.
Yeah, you too.
When I first discovered Natasha, I was in a desperate place with my son, and his anxiety was getting worse, and we had tried counseling, and it was not going well.
We were told at that point, we can't help your son. Early intervention is great. He's too young.
Parenting a child with anxiety is not easy, and sometimes it feels hopeless.
First time we took her to a therapist, who then dismissed her after about a year and a half, putting it down to bad parenting.
But what if it didn't have to be that way? What if you could join a community with parents in the same boat, with kids with similar struggles and issues? What if you could have access to resources that will help you with behavior and sleep and avoidance and opposition and fears? What if you can have somebody walk with you on your journey? Someone with clinical expertise and parental knowledge. Hi, my name is Natasha Daniels, and I'm a child therapist and a mom to 3 kids. And I've dedicated my life and my career to helping kids with anxiety and OCD, including my own. And now I want to help you too. I have created the AT Parenting community to do just that. When you join as a member of the community, not only will you get access to resources that will help you with your child's struggles and help your family reduce the chaos in their home, you're going to be joining a community of parents just like you, with knowledge, love, and support to give. You will get access to online classes that will help your child and your child's struggles. You'll also get bonus videos and podcast material made just for members. And I've got your kids covered too. You'll have access to a library full of worksheets and videos specially designed for your kids by myself and other therapists. But that's not the best part. You're going to be getting direct attention from me, and I will be giving you support in many different ways. I'll be doing Facebook Lives every single week in our private Facebook group, where members can go to talk and get support. I'll also be doing office hours in our private Facebook group. So once a week, you can ask me whatever you want. I'll be available for an hour to answer your direct questions. But if you need a little bit more support, I've got you covered too, because I will be doing coaching calls for those that need it twice a month. And for those that need even more support, I'll be doing once a month support group calls. And I'll be doing a member spotlight call. So I'll be picking one member every month, and I'll be walking them through the process of helping their children. And you'll have access to the replay and to that phone call as well. Raising a child with anxiety or OCD is hard, but together we can get through it.
Natasha gave us practical tools. She wasn't like the books that we had read.
If you have a child with anxiety or OCD, she is your go-to woman.
Natasha had practical real-life advice that we started implementing the day that we listened to them.
In a desperate time in my journey with my son, she has been a lifesaver. Her resources have given me hope, they've given me tools and support, and they're some of the best resources you can find out there for anxiety and OCD.